The Fall of Xylos. The event was orchestrated not as a battlefield engagement, but as a chilling public execution, a clinical demonstration of unquestionable final force broadcast simultaneously to every sentient species in the local group. From the soaring, hyperdense crystal towers of Xylos, the first fully terraformed human world beyond Sol, 8 billion citizens watched their future dissolve in a terrifying instant. The ancient, star-spanning Gorthian Empire delivered its opening move, the concentrated discharge of its primary anti-planetary weapon, the Scythe beam. The sheer volume of energy released was incomprehensible, violating several known laws of physics. Plasma, contained by magnetic fields of impossible strength, scoured the sky, burning thick incandescent lines of white-hot destruction through orbital defense grids that had been meticulously deemed impregnable for centuries, effortlessly tearing through layers of nested particle cannon platforms designed to weather fusion detonations. The Gorthian flagship, a mile-long, matte black shadow named Austerity, hung impassively above the ionosphere, its vast, humming weapons bays engaging with cold, mechanical contempt, treating the defense of an entire planet as a low-level processing task. The final moments were captured by a dozen sinking defense satellites before they succumbed to the barrage. The elegant mile-high spire of the Planetary Congress, the very symbol of human stellar achievement, dissolving instantly into incandescent dust. This was followed by the terrible, agonizing silence where 3 million souls in the capital sector, caught between hope and terminal denial, were vaporized in a single surgical flash. The entire galaxy saw it all, the absolute devastating destruction of a human dream rendered utterly obsolete in moments, and every species understood that a new, terrifying power, one that measured its history in geological epochs and had forgotten the concept of mercy, had finally awakened. The frozen image of the crumbling spire, held on countless screens before the feed died, became the permanent, painful mark of humanity's initial, brutal failure. A scar visible across known space, a lesson learned in fire. Declaration of Extinction. From their monolithic, geometric obsidian command station, anchored within the impenetrable imperial core, the Gorthian Imperium made its grand, definitive, and profoundly arrogant pronouncement. The Elder Council, comprised of beings whose consciousnesses were layered by millennia of experience, and who viewed younger species as temporal dust motes and dangerous novelties, formally declared humanity, or the aggressively expanding Terranus minor, a failed species, a fleeting, chaotic, and psychologically unstable weed that must be irrevocably plucked from the celestial garden. Their official doctrine described humans not merely as enemies, but as psychologically volatile, a dangerous, rapidly spreading fungus that posed a systemic, unpredictable risk to the ordered predictability of galactic stability. They meticulously listed the names of fallen human colonies: Xylos, Meridian, New Ithaca, Kepler 186f, and the once vibrant orbital habitats of the Terrani system, reading them out as if reading an inventory of discarded, worthless waste, their voices resonating with inhuman, synthetic coldness that betrayed no emotion, only bureaucratic finality. They presented forensic data on the speed of human self-destruction under pressure, arguing their intervention was a mercy. The pronouncement culminated in a final, cold statement delivered with absolute, chilling finality. The cycle of man is concluded. Its existence is now null. No further resistance is anticipated or required. The contagion is sterilized, and the systems are now clear for Gorthian occupation. This public declaration was met with a deep, obligatory silence across the 1,000 vassal species under the Empire's heel, a silence that affirmed the terrifying end of the human era and cemented the absolute, unquestioned power of the ancient conquerors. But in the deep, untamed reaches of the periphery, where the fragments of human life fled, that silence was interpreted differently, not as a eulogy, but as a direct, non-negotiable challenge. Earth's scars and buried roots. When the Gorthian cleansing fleets finally reached the Sol system, anticipating a final, glorious, ceremonial act of planetary defense, they instead encountered an eerie, unsettling emptiness. The planet was largely evacuated, its vast surface structures deserted, its once vibrant cities burned into toxic monuments of failure, left to scorch beneath concentrated, surgical thermal pulses. The Gorthians claimed Sol, planting their monolithic banners on silent ruins, celebrating their easy, bloodless victory over the ancestral homeworld. The absence of traditional resistance was immediately documented as definitive proof of cowardice and strategic incapacity. However, beneath the toxic dust clouds and kilometers of melted bedrock of old Earth, the true, essential work of survival had already begun, hidden from thermal and gravimetric scans. Millions of essential engineers, hydrologists, xenobotanists, medical personnel, and cultural archivists, the intellectual, genetic, and operational bedrock of the species, had retreated into the vast interconnected substrata complexes. These complexes, built centuries prior for nuclear or catastrophic environmental contingencies, were quickly and ruthlessly repurposed, turning ancient bunkers, massive geothermal plants, and deep-sea research labs into the desperate, self-sustaining cradle of a subterranean renaissance. Entire scientific divisions were now dedicated solely to resource reclamation and Gorthian technology analysis. The immediate scarred surface was lost to the enemy's silent, bored occupation, but the deep, living root system of humanity remained dug deeper than Gorthian steel and fire could ever reach, ensuring genetic and intellectual continuity that the Empire had entirely failed to account for in its shallow analysis of the species. The true, immeasurable tragedy was the desperate, chaotic flight known as the Great Diaspora, a mass evacuation executed in hushed secrecy before the Gorthian fleets could fully blockade the core systems. Over 1 million independent, stripped-down refugee vessels, ranging from modified deep space cargo haulers to flimsy shielded luxury yachts, were overloaded past safe capacity with life, carrying precious archival batacores, rare planetary seeds, and the sheer, crushing weight of 200 billion lost, unmourned memories. They scattered randomly into the infinite darkness of the local group and beyond, traveling for years under cold fusion drives and a pervasive, quiet desperation that became the defining internal emotion of an entire generation. These vessels, collectively known as the Ark-class diaspora, were never a conventional military formation. They were fragile, fleeing pods of human civilization, carrying the entire genetic and cultural library of the species into the void. Their communications remained absolutely silent, their paths intentionally dark, random, and coded. Yet every single child born in those cramped, low-gravity holds was deliberately named after a star, a lost continent, or a forgotten Earth hero. This painful tradition ensured that the history of their brutal defeat and the fierce, burning promise of their return were etched directly into the minds of the next generation as an unwritten, non-negotiable birthright and primary life purpose. The silence was their greatest weapon. A celebration of premature victory. For 2 standard Gorthian cycles, a period spanning roughly 5 Earth years, the Empire reveled in its perceived total triumph. They established slow, meticulous military garrisons in the core worlds, claiming the dormant human infrastructure, and contemptuously ignored the scattered, seemingly worthless periphery and the silent diaspora, believing them to be self-limiting threats. The Elder Council proclaimed the successful eradication of a viral threat, and even commissioned the distribution of human artifacts, child's toys, philosophical literature, digitized art, and musical scores as exotic, amusing trophies across their 1,000 capitals, failing entirely to comprehend the intrinsic value or the dangerous adaptability inherent in the items they collected. Their military strategists officially closed the file on humanity, documenting the species as extinguished, utterly lacking in long-term strategic depth or centralized command structure. This critical period of Gorthian self-congratulation, characterized by suffocating complacency and dismissive arrogance, proved to be the single most costly strategic mistake in the Empire's 80,000-year history. For the enemy they believed dead was now simply observing, adapting, and rigorously calculating optimal countermeasures. They failed catastrophically to account for the millions of tiny forgotten deep space logistics caches and automated resource refineries hidden throughout the asteroid belts, waiting only for a coded reactivation signal. Then, amidst the silence, came the anomaly, a flicker, a signal. It was not a message of open defiance, nor a desperate plea for aid, but a single, isolated, repeating burst of ancient radio wave jazz, a raw, chaotic 20th-century melody known as mood indigo. Gorthian decryption analysts had decades ago designated the frequency and content as culturally safe and irrelevant, a form of low-level random cosmic noise. The signal was clean, utterly untraceable, and utterly baffling to the Gorthian deep space monitoring stations because it carried absolutely no military data or standard encryption. It was followed 3 weeks later by a short looping data packet containing only the outdated cryptic Earth coordinates of a vanished fictional library encoded in a human linguistic dialect that had been dead for 5 centuries, a language known as Old English. The Gorthian arrays registered these isolated anomalies, dismissing them as stray cosmic noise or sensor decay, classifying them under non-threatening cultural residue. Yet within the dark, silent, interconnected network of surviving humanity, the meaning was instantly understood, codenamed the Siren's Call. The scattered seeds of resistance were not only alive, but they were now actively germinating, coordinating rendezvous points and exchanging essential system data using the very noise the enemy dismissed as their secure language. The jazz was the synchronization code. The cultural irrelevance was the perfect invisible camouflage for tactical rendezvous points deep in the void. The Fleet of Scars. Guided by those baffling coded radio whispers and cryptic coordinate packets, the disparate refugee ships began their painstaking convergence, coalescing in the deep, freezing shadow of a vast, unmapped dark nebula known only to the oldest, most obscure human navigators. Their assembled fleet was less an armada and more an operational embarrassment, a horrifying testament to desperation and ingenuity. Deep space fishing trawlers hastily refitted with salvaged plasma cutters and kinetic railguns, commercial liners protected by bolted-on layers of mismatched reactive armor and ablative plating, and a handful of heavily modified military hulls, barely held together by desperate, ingenious zero-G engineering and sheer willpower. Every ship, like the battered Vengeance of Xylos, a former deep-ocean research vessel, or the Archmetic Hippocrates, now a mobile repair bay, carried a distinct, harrowing story of escape and loss. Every crew member shared a common, silent, boiling rage that was their operational fuel. They were unified not by a conventional grand strategy, but by a shared visceral understanding. They were the last, and their ultimate purpose was no longer passive survival, but existence at all costs, guaranteed and defended by immediate brutal violence against the Gorthian presence. Memory forged into munition. In the Hidden Fleet's command centers, the crushing memory of the lost worlds was formally canonized, codified, and converted into relentless operational doctrine. Xylos was the name of the Central Command Matrix. Meridian was the code name for the Deep Strike kinetic missiles. New Ithaca became the core tenet of the primary training doctrine, known chillingly as the Crucible Doctrine. This doctrine dictated that recruits must face the strategic and emotional failure of their ancestors head-on, studying every critical mistake. Every tragedy, every moment of tactical failure, every strategic weakness was converted into a technical specification, a critical safety protocol, or a strategic tenet. Children learned history not from static texts, but from live combat simulations of the final battle of their namesake planet, understanding every flaw, every tactical failure, and every moment of desperate, terrible human courage in the face of annihilation. Their new culture was a perpetual, painful cycle of collective grief, mechanical instruction, and relentless tactical refinement, ensuring that no historical error, no matter how small, was ever repeated. Loss was their first teacher. Survival was their only graduation. The first strikes were not acts of military might, but surgical, hyper-precise insertions aimed relentlessly at the Gorthian logistical tail, command latency, and decentralized processing centers. A single, critical Gorthian sensor hub, the Eye of Viridian, in the Outer Rim, simply vanished without a trace, its last transmission cut mid-sentence, leaving behind only the ghost of a binary number and a puzzled Imperial security officer. A massive supply convoy carrying vital mineral components stopped transmitting and was later found adrift, its crew vaporized by tailored nerve gas, and its cargo systems perfectly looted by hyper-efficient unseen human teams who left no thermal or radiation signature. These attacks were tiny, strategically irrelevant on the vast continental scale of the Gorthian Empire, yet they carried a distinctive, chilling human signature: total operational precision, minimal energy footprint, and an absolute commitment to silence and untraceability. The Gorthian sector commanders could not find the human ships. They found only the cold, inexplicable lack of what had been there minutes before, a subtle, cold withdrawal of existence that whispered of an enemy far more dangerous than expected, an enemy that had learned how to turn the void itself into a weapon. These operations were codenamed Ghost Runs, and their sole objective was to demonstrate that the Ghost was armed, calculating, and living in the negative space of the Gorthian map. The Empire mocks the dead. The official Gorthian media machine ramped up its propaganda campaign in frantic, poorly disguised response to the unsettling, unquantifiable attacks, painting the minor, surgical raids as the chaotic final death throes of a desperate, extinct threat. Holographic cartoons, crudely animated and displayed across imperial plazas, depicted ludicrous stick-figure humans flailing impotently against the monolithic, stoic might of the Gorthian navy, while the imperial newscasts referred to the enemy only as the ghosts of failure and the remnants of Xylos. This intense, repetitive mockery was intended to reassure the increasingly nervous Gorthian populace and their thousand vassal species, but its underlying tone began to shift dramatically, from genuine dismissive arrogance to a strained, frantic, and repetitive insistence. High Command was forced to issue daily updates about the non-threat. The sheer expenditure of resources, time, and command attention on an enemy they had officially declared dead created a massive, glaring self-contradiction that began to sow tiny, corrosive seeds of doubt among the more observant vassal races. If they are truly dead, why does the invincible empire require daily assurances of their non-existence? Why do we keep talking about ghosts? The Admiral's Insight. A Gorthian sector admiral named Vrath, a veteran of 300 campaigns and considered a master strategist known for his unflappable demeanor, was captured during a spectacularly successful human raid on an asteroid refueling station that was defended by 3 capital ships. He was one of the first high-ranking Gorthians to see the enemy close up and alive, observing their weary, quiet, yet terrifying competence and their lack of traditional military bravado. When interrogated about why the humans continued to fight against such overwhelming, logical odds, the numbers still overwhelmingly favored the Empire. He stared at his captors, scarred, half-starved, but intensely focused and devoid of theatrics, and said, his voice a gravelly echo of professional dread, "They don't stop. They don't know when the fight is lost because they have genetically and culturally excised the conditions for surrender. They just adapt. Every defeat is simply a new layer of protective, hardened skin forged in the intense, unforgiving heat of your weapons. You successfully kill the old way of fighting, and they immediately invent a new, more efficient, and often crueler one. Their weakness is their flexibility. Their strength is their inability to accept a final outcome." His chilling warning, though delivered to the enemy, was a moment of terrible strategic clarity for the Gorthian High Command. They were not fighting a conventional, finite army. They were fighting an unstable, rapidly iterating biological and cultural imperative that thrived on challenge and failure. Children of the Void. On board the derelict, patched-up hulls, and in the cramped, low-gravity maintenance tunnels of the Ark-class ships, a new generation knew no sky but the cold, distant white points seen through reinforced viewport slits. They were the Void-born, and their first lessons were practical and utterly unforgiving. They learned to repair critically stressed power conduits and manually reroute life support before they learned to walk. They recognized the precise frequency, engine harmonic, and patrol rhythm of a Gorthian cruiser before they knew their own parents' faces. For them, the long war was not a disruptive interruption or a crisis. It was the absolute, total condition of their birth and perpetual existence. They grew up with an inherent, deep-seated knowledge of astronomical loss and an unwavering, quiet, practical determination to never yield the initiative. They were the perfect soldiers, pilots, and engineers, unburdened by the memory of easy peace or comfort, focused solely on the terrifying, non-negotiable necessity of returning home and reclaiming the light, viewing the vastness of space as their only true, unforgiving home and their only competent training ground. Existence, not vengeance. The critical turning point was marked by the brutal 9-week-long Battle of K-74, a major Gorthian staging area and heavy jump gate network that the Empire considered the linchpin of the inner periphery, untouchable and essential. The human fleet, though still officially outnumbered 8-1, engaged with a calculated, feral ferocity the Gorthians had never encountered, utilizing complex, reckless gravity well maneuvers known as mantle diving, and microjumps previously thought impossible by any species, including their own. The humans fought not for crude vengeance. The word felt too small, too emotional for their objective, but simply to be definitively, visibly, and immovably present in that strategic sector. Their successful, painful occupation was not merely a tactical gain. It was a profound, undeniable statement of continued, violent existence. They held the line not out of strategic necessity, but out of an unspoken sacred promise to the generations born in the darkness. Every laser blast, every kinetic impact, every loss taken and inflicted was a confirmation spoken into the void. We are here. We exist. We are sovereign in this space, and we will not be moved. They bled profusely, but they refused utterly to break. The calculus of human evolution. The Gorthian command structure was ancient, tiered, and utterly rigid, relying on immutable, proven battle doctrines that had served them successfully for millennia, valuing tradition and procedure over disruptive innovation. The humans, however, were constantly iterating at hyperspeed, burning through old ideas and failed systems in a ruthless pursuit of efficiency. They didn't just counter Gorthian technology, they immediately adopted and integrated it, often weaponizing it against its original architects. They reverse-engineered Gorthian shield harmonics, heavy weapon signatures, and even their complex data burst encryption algorithms within weeks of capturing derelict husks, turning the Empire's own designs into exploitable vulnerabilities. Their naval architects and bioengineers, forged in the crucible of constant combat stress, developed sophisticated counter-tactics against Gorthian maneuvers before those maneuvers were even officially integrated into the Empire's own training manuals. The Gorthians fought a war of historical precedent and dogma. The humans fought a war of exponential, desperate adaptation, evolving and discarding failed strategies faster than their ancient enemy could even document a new threat. This fundamental difference between the static predator and the rapidly mutating intelligent virus was proving fatal to the established galactic order. The infectious defiance. The battered human ships began to appear not just in combat zones, but as stealthy, subversive emissaries of active resistance, revolution, and decentralized command. They contacted the subjugated vassal races, species the Gorthians had enslaved and psychologically crushed for countless centuries, and showed them the tangible path of active insurgency and resource acquisition, often providing the infrastructure to support it. Humans offered no grand, idealistic rhetoric of protection. They offered a terrifying, simple truth backed by technical data, proven tactics, and a schedule for coordinated uprising. The Gorthians can be killed, and here are the schematics and coordinated schedules to help you do it. Under human leadership and logistical support, entire sectors of oppressed peoples, from the technologically brilliant, hive-minded Sylvans to the physically formidable, warlike Gorok, rose up in violent, unexpected unison, seeing in the battered human fleet a reflection of their own desperate, long-suppressed desire for liberty and self-determination. The humans provided the seed of soul, the infectious idea that weakness was not a permanent biological condition, but a temporary strategic state to be violently overcome, and that an ancient empire was just a structure waiting to crumble. The refusal of false peace. The sheer weariness and debilitating logistical strain on the Imperial High Command became a palpable, undeniable force, accelerating political fractures within the core. In a desperate, late move to stabilize the collapsing periphery and stem the tide of rebellion, they offered definitive, generous terms to the human command. A massive defensible sector of space for the humans to call their own, a demilitarized zone, and an end to all official hostilities, suggesting coexistence. The Gorthian diplomatic message spoke eloquently of mutual respect and a new era of stable diplomatic coexistence, a final weary concession. The human response was brief, delivered across all Imperial frequencies by a civilian spokeswoman, Dr. Elara Vance, who had survived the final siege of Earth's subterranean complexes, lost her family at Xylos, and carried the quiet, immense weight of the trillions lost. We will negotiate when every soul taken from us is formally mourned, when every colony lost is made irrevocably free and returned to human governance, and when your empire is dismantled down to the last wrench, its central authority dissolved and its armies scattered. Until then, the cost of peace is your continued, rapid decay and ultimate oblivion. We will accept nothing less than the restoration of all that was lost. The Empire realized then that the war was no longer about territory or resources. It was a total existential conflict the humans were prepared to wage indefinitely, demanding a moral and absolute victory over a practical compromise. The Imperial Exhaustion. The vast, ancient Gorthian Empire did not fall in a single glorious climactic battle or a massive, decisive fleet action. It collapsed slowly, agonizingly, from systemic exhaustion, bureaucratic ossification, and catastrophic internal failure. The sheer, unending administrative, military, and economic effort required to fight an enemy that never surrendered, never ran out of recruits, and constantly adapted, proved too great for its brittle, centralized structure. Supply ships began turning back mid-route. Essential Gorthian manufacturing hubs were paralyzed by internal sabotage or simply ceased functioning due to cascading systems errors. Morale failed utterly, and internal dissent, fueled by the relentless human-led rebellions and the crushing weight of endless campaigning, sank the ancient structure into total administrative and military paralysis. The Empire had successfully conquered everything it had touched for 80,000 years, but it could not conquer the terrifying inherent human ability to simply not stop fighting, to endure past the point of logical, acceptable loss, right up until the enemy broke first, not by force of arms, but by force of attrition. Forged in loss, not victory. The dust of the collapsed empire settled not with triumphant parades or celebratory broadcasts, but with quiet, grim, and necessary reflection on the immense, searing cost. Humanity emerged from the shadows not as conquering heroes seeking glory, but as scarred, relentlessly competent survivors whose sole focus was rebuilding. Their fleets were heavy, brutal, and scarred, filled with sailors and pilots who would never set foot on solid ground, knowing only decks, maintenance tunnels, and the cold silence of the void. Every ship was a monument to a specific, hard-won lesson. Every engine hum, a memorial to a lost world and a promise kept. The physical wounds of the war were immense. Trillions dead, countless worlds rendered uninhabitable for centuries. But the psychological scars were deeper, forming an unbreakable communal bond defined by shared trauma and unwavering purpose. They had paid the ultimate price for their liberty, and they emerged as a species fundamentally, irrevocably changed, hardened by the knowledge that the galaxy had tried and catastrophically failed to erase them completely. They were survivors who knew the cost of everything. The Epilogue. For millennia, the established galactic powers had seen the expansion of newly stellar species as a predictable, manageable curve, a brief burst of ambitious expansion, a flash of technological glory, and a final, quiet dissolution when faced with a truly ancient, overwhelming power. They assumed the humans would follow that path, dying like any other race that valued predictable peace and comfort over relentless persistence and endless confrontation. They thought we'd die quietly. They forgot what we are. They profoundly underestimated the simple, terrible truth that tragedy for humanity is not an ending or a deterrent. It is the brutal, necessary forge in which our greatest, most terrifying strength is hammered into shape. We are the species that rebuilds faster, adapts better, and endures longer than any force designed to break us, because every moment of loss simply removes the non-essential, leaving only the hardened core of absolute will and necessity. We do not fight to conquer, we fight only to be. The unconquerable truth. Our ultimate strength was never found in the density of our kinetic munitions, the integrity of our layered shields, or the speed of our star drives. Our true, terrifying advantage was simpler, deeper, and far more incomprehensible to an ancient, ordered, and arrogant civilization like the Gorthians. It is this truth that matters most, The only lesson the galaxy finally learned from the ash heap of the fallen Gorthian Empire, and the final chilling principle etched onto the vast, quiet memorial walls of the newly liberated Old Earth substrata complexes where the roots of humanity survived. We don't win because we're the strongest. We win because we don't possess the necessary neurological or cultural framework to ever truly know how to die. The cycle of human persistence is infinite, and we will wait, adapt, and return forever.